Good afternoon, all. Welcome to our final session of the Day of Learning. Can I get a thumbs up that you can hear me? Okay, great. New-ish headphones here. So I want to thank you all for attending the previous sessions if you did so, and hopefully you found some information of value in our sessions here today on Zoom. If you do not know me or haven't seen me yet, my name is Julia Thompson, and I'm the Education Program Manager here at the Holocaust Center for Humanity. My colleague Morgan Romero is going to be managing the Zoom tech, so you may see and hear her as well. And our last but certainly not least session of the day today is titled Growing Up Black in Nazi Germany, presented by the Center's Always Wonderful Teaching and Learning Specialist, Paul Regelbrugge, who I know that you've probably seen in earlier sessions today. So I just always have to start talking about Paul in an introduction by mentioning that for the first several years that I worked at the Holocaust Center, I always heard these mythical stories about this teacher in Spokane. His name was Paul. He was this incredible guy, super tall, bald, just awesome. He used to be a lawyer, then he started teaching. His students always won prizes in our annual writing, art, and film contest. But then he moved all the way from Spokane to Buffalo, New York. I mean, clear across the country. But thankfully for all of us here at the center and in our community, Paul came back to Washington State in 2017. I think that year is right. And taught in the Kent School District, continuing to partner with us on many programs. He also somehow found the time to write a book about Holocaust survivor Robert Holzer called The Yellow Star House. So I encourage you to check that out. Now, in August of 2019, in the wake of legislation passed here in our state that strongly encourages Holocaust education and further supports and funds opportunities to teach the Holocaust, not only to students, but in the form of pedagogical opportunities and professional development for teachers like you. We were absolutely thrilled to hire Paul to the center's staff. So his boots on the ground role means that he does very deep outreach, partnership, collaboration with teachers and administrators all over the state, as well as the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, to further Holocaust learning in our schools. And of course, he's just a fabulous curriculum and lesson plan writer, which feeds into what he's going to be doing for the next hour. A newly developed series of lessons that center one of the non-Jewish victim groups singled out by the Nazis during the Holocaust, Black people in Germany, also known as Afro-Germans. So Paul, I will let you take it away and do what you do best. But thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you, Julia. I really flattered, and I appreciate it, and appreciate you, and appreciate you all for being here regarding certainly a subject that is not frequently talked about when one thinks about studying and learning about the Holocaust. And so without further ado, I think I'd like to begin as I would perhaps and sort of model this for students. And I'm going to share screen right now. So hopefully you can see this. And what I'd like you to do is to please type into chat, what do you notice in this picture and what do you wonder? After we do this, I'll move into a couple other things and start explaining things about what these lessons are. But I think I'd love to start by asking you to look at this picture and type in, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder in this picture? Swastika on the boy's shirt, no doubt. Friends, I love that. That's great, great catch. How they feel, swastika, swastika. Someone who looks lost. Only one Black boy and he's wearing a swastika. Why was this photo taken? The relationship among the children. Who is the boy in the center? Black child among whites. Wonder where and when the photo was taken. I wonder where the sad expression comes from. Oh boy, that's a loaded question. Well, so great. I mean, your comments in there, your notices and wonders are fantastic. And it's exactly what I would hope students would as well catch, notice, wonder about. And you definitely have really hit the gamut of what I hope that you would gain from such photo. The boy in the center, his name is Hans-Jürgen Massaquoi. And Hans-Jürgen is the son of a Liberian prince, basically, and a German white mother. So he constituted, though, a white German, or sorry, an Afro-German. And he grew up in Germany, in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust era. And what I decided to do, actually, before I move on, I think I'd love to share another quote here at this point. And I'm going to ask, let's see, I'm going to pull it up right now, because I think the quote that I'm going to share right now will help frame a lot of the discussion and sort of the objectives that I have for today's session. So let me put this up right here. Okay, and so if we could Marcy, could you please unmute yourself and do me the wonderful favor of reading this passage that I have on the screen right now. That's a picture of Hans-Jürgen again as a child. And Marcy, for those who don't know, is one of our supreme docents for the Holocaust Center. I knew her both from my capacity as a teacher, and I've had the privilege to get to work with her in my current role. And she shares a passion and a love for the story of Hans Massaquoi as I do. And so I thought how fitting it would be to ask her to read this passage. So Marcy, could you do that, please?
Thank you so much, Paul. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, this is a powerful passage in an even more powerful book. So Herr Tutke, one of Hans-Jürgen's childhood teachers, used to delight in wearing his Nazi uniform in the classroom to lend an especially festive note to his courses, which he used mainly to vent his racist hostility. Stop that niggerhafta grinsen, negrified grinning, he once hissed at me when he caught me joining the class in innocent laughter. Negroes don't have a thing to grin about in National Socialist Germany. Once Dutke ordered me not to leave the room when the bell signaled at the end of the class. What I have to tell you won't take long, he announced after making sure that all the children had left the room. Looking at me with undisguised loathing through his thick horn-rimmed glasses, Dutke chided me for trying to turn the class against him and for showing my disrespect of him with my constant Niederhaftes. Let me tell you something, young man. Don't feel so smug, because after we have finished with the Jews, people like you will be next. That's all I have to say. Heil Hitler.
Thank you so much, Marcy. That was so well read. And I'm just blown away by the words of that teacher. And I think I chose to use to highlight that quote to sort of begin things in the wake of our of the notice and wonder, which is kind of meant as a hook, because it really encapsulates the entirety of what I hope to convey in this. I mean, I have two objectives for this session, as I did in the lessons, and I wanted to give you a little bit of context for it. I mean, my hope is that as a result of today's session, that one, you will all learn a little bit more about what it must have been like to be a Black person growing up in Nazi Germany. And number two, the hope is that in sharing and highlighting a couple of different activities that I sort of created for this series of lessons growing up Black in Nazi Germany, that you would have a couple new sort of teacher tools or moves to consider, whether in the context of this series of lessons growing up Black in Nazi Germany or relative to other ways or texts that you teach. Because as a former ELA teacher, primarily myself, I can tell you that, how we'll end this, certainly in the classroom, in person, it would just be tremendous and impactful and really consistent with what I hope students would walk away from learning about racism, prejudice, bigotry in all of their forms. Okay, so as suggested, or as indicated, this series of lessons really is premised, it comes from this inspiration, Destined to Witness. But that was almost secondary, okay? Destined to Witness, it was by Hans-Jürgen Massaquoi. And the inspiration came from, as a teacher, and I would start, for example, with something like the USHMM's timeline activity. And students, in learning about other victims other than just the Jews, and they would learn about this group and this group and this group, but how much did they learn about it? How much time does somebody spend in talking about victims other than the Jewish people? And the two most commonly asked groups of other victims, always from students, regardless of their color or their background, would always be, one, the disabled. They'd want to know more about the targets against disabled people, because so many either suffer from disabilities, have members in their family who suffer from disabilities, know people, etc., and trying to wonder what was that about. And then the other one, especially when I taught in Buffalo, New York, where the vast majority of my students were African American, just jaws dropping, saying, A, what the heck were Black people doing in Germany? And B, are you kidding me? What the heck was that about? In terms of what could that have been like to be Black during the Holocaust, when you think that the core of Nazi ideology was based on race? And so how did it play out? And so you could sort of see from that quote that we just began with there, that Blacks in Germany, there were just merely only a grand total of about 20,000. In a population of 65 million people in Germany in 1933, there were only 20,000, which is far less than 1%, and certainly far less than the approximately 525,000 Jewish people who lived in Germany in 1933. So a real minority. So therefore, that when Herr Dutke was saying that after we're done with the Jews, we'll come from you, that almost served to protect in some way the Black people. Sure, they were persecuted, sure, they were targeted and berated and not allowed to enter certain things and just sort of cast aside, but the process of ultimately separation, expulsion, and then eventually worse, never came to be, fortunately, because obviously the situation involving Jews and then the increasing tone and heft of the war itself obviously preoccupied the minds of the Nazi hierarchy. And so they never really got around to finishing the problem, sadly for Herr Dutke's purposes there. So again, so with this idea of I thought really, gosh, this would be so incredible then if, especially in my role now, when I was thinking, are there any lessons? Are there any teacher-friendly, student-friendly lessons that one could use to teach about this in an engaging way, rather than just share articles or share statistics, like I just gave you a couple statistics there. And so I thought, wow, this could be really handy for teachers, especially as we have increasing diversity all over our state, all over our country, to give sort of an additional resource that speaks to people other, of different backgrounds, of different color, to allow for maybe additional opportunities to connect, to empathize, and to see that this really was a broad swath of racism and prejudice and not just one group as a target. So in today's session, then I'm going to highlight just a couple of facets of it. So I guess I should start by sharing with you and showing with you where this lesson exists. And so let me do this now. Okay, so back over in our best practices page, there is a section as you scroll down. This is on our website here. And as you scroll down, it would come under Changing World. And you click Changing World and you click Deep Dive right there. And that deep dive will take you here where under deep dive, so you can see we're exploring deeper facets of how the world was changing for people in occupied Europe and specifically in Germany at this point. And you see the series of lessons growing up Black in Nazi Germany. And so if you were to click that, you would see this really nice PDF here that my colleague Rick helped me transform this into something sort of visually appealing. But it's definitely built in, let's see, there's sort of 4 different components to it after a hook and an introduction part. Today, we're going to focus on the hook, which I sort of started there already by showing you the picture. And then we're going to focus on one of the key lessons, which is really the culminating work at the end of it. Okay, so again, I try to give the rationale, the questions that are going to be addressed in this resource, the desired outcomes. It's intentionally created both for remote and or in-person teaching. The ideal, of course, is in person, but definitely, it can be adaptable for remote instruction. So scrolling down now, what I'm doing here is, and I can put that if it's not already in the chat there, I'll definitely put that in here as we go along. But for my purposes in navigating through, I prefer, because it's just easier for me, to use the Google Docs that I created here. Okay, and so I'll be sharing a few things. And what I'd like to start with here is this context piece, right? So we started with the hook, the why. And in particular, there's one key question that I'd like to accentuate here, which is this. And we sort of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like you to keep this in mind as we're learning and reading a little bit about the context in Nazi Germany and as well Hans Massaquoi's life. What challenges do you think the boy in the center of the photograph might have faced among his peers, among his teachers, among German citizens generally during the years of the Holocaust, 1933 to 1945? So at this point then, I am going to put this document into chat, okay? So this is a little bit of context. It's introductory passages. It's just about 5-6 paragraphs total. So I'm going to share this as quickly as I can. Awesome. And what I'd like you to do then, please, is to open up that passage, and I am going to give you about, let's say, 4 minutes to just read this. You can just make a couple notes if you'd like, but I'd like you, once you complete reading it, to just type in any particular notices or wonders, something that powerful or potent that particularly sticks out from reading this background passage. Because just like for students, for those teachers in here who might not fully get the context or understand, well, I want to learn about what happened and how Black people were targeted in Germany, this hopefully will suffice in this first preliminary layer. The way it's intended in the lesson, there's a notice and wonder document that teachers can utilize for this purpose. There's a prompt for a claim evidence reasoning response to it. So there are numerous things once you play around on the thing, but at this point then I'm going to be quiet and just give you about 4 minutes to read this, and then I'll come in the meantime. I'd love to see some comments that you have in the chat about what you see. So thank you. I'm seeing some great comments already coming into the chat. The Nazis created a culture of us versus them to justify their atrocities to multiple people groups, emphasizing that crazy statistic of how few Black people there were in Germany. Yep, the sterilization program. That's a great point, Akiva, there. Based on Nazi ideology, any non-Aryan identities would have increased focus after the primary enemy of the Jewish people were eradicated. Yeah, I think it's, it's funny because that 1.3, I think it was like a 0.013. It was weird because it was transposed from the a quote that came in the USHMM source. So we'll have to fix that in this one at least. I see that a question about why did the text change from homosexuals to gay men? That's a great question. And in fact, just very recently, and when I say recently, like within the last 2 weeks, I think, Alana, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the USHMM has since come out with updated definitions and pages related to the persecution of homosexuals, changing the use of that term and sort of distinguishing the persecution of gay men essentially only, as opposed to the fact that there was really little to no persecution per se of lesbians, of gay women. So they've started to clarify some of the language and update it. Much thanks to many. So yeah, so you can see, okay, so I think you're getting at the question that I would then next ask. And I don't think that one would need to even know much more. I think that's sort of an answer that can be, it's a question that can be answered based on just this text. And that is something I would pose if they haven't wondered or asked about it is, okay, so how did the persecution of the Jewish people differ from the persecution of Afro-Germans during the era of the Holocaust? And I think that in your comments alone, you identify it, it's accentuated and it's clear. And that's what I would want to make sure is that, see, in the definition of the Holocaust, typically people refer to the Holocaust as the persecution of the Jewish people. And that's why even in the USHMM definition, it then says during the era of the Holocaust, these other groups were persecuted for these reasons, for those reasons, etc. The one thing in common is that because the Nazis had defined Jewish people by race, therefore this was, at least they had in common the persecution by race or biological. In the Aryan view, in their mindset, it was obviously inferior to the Aryans. Okay. So definitely I would want to go right from the hook to make sure now we start teaching. So we give a little bit of this context. First, the context a little bit so we understand the persecution. Somebody asked as well, who are these 20,000, Afro-Germans? That would get us into another side conversation, but certainly as our docent Marcy could also talk about too, there were a number of Black people in Germany, sadly pejoratively termed the Rhineland bastards. They were kind of the after World War I, and there were French Black soldiers fighting in that area, Alsace-Lorraine. Many Black soldiers were there, and while they were there, some of them, they fell in love and had relations with white German women who thought that they were all exotic and everything. And so many offspring were born as a result of it. And that contributed significantly to the number of Black people in Germany at the time. There are definitely reference articles that could elucidate that point for you. Okay, so now we go from the context for Hans, for the Afro-Germans in Germany at the time. And now I would definitely want to have my students learn a little bit about Hans Jürgen's life here. So for this part here, what I'd love is if we could get, let's see, there are just 3 paragraphs here. If I could get volunteers, 3 different volunteers, one to read each paragraph. So would someone please unmic and read the first paragraph that's here. In this picture, you can see that's the picture of Hans's mother, Bertha. That's Hans as a child, and this is his father. His father sadly played a very, very non-existent role for Hans until basically after the war, when Hans spent some time there. And that was a very interesting relationship highlighted in the book. So who could please read our first paragraph here?
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Hans-Jürgen Massaquoi was born in Hamburg, Germany, the son of a white German nurse and a black Liberian businessman. He grew up in the house of his grandfather, Momoulu Massaquoi, who was both the Liberian consul general in Hamburg and also an important contact with black travelers to Germany. Hans and his mother remained in Germany when political trouble took his father and grandfather back to Liberia, and they had to accustom themselves both to the realities of a working class lifestyle and to the rise of the Nazis beginning in 1933.
Thank you. Someone else for the second paragraph?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Like other German boys, Hans went to school, and like other German boys and wanting to fit in with his friends, he was captivated by Hitler. So he was devastated to learn that as a Black child, he was ineligible to join the Hitler Youth and the rest of his schoolmates. He later found that because of his skin color, his path to secondary education and an eventual profession was blocked, causing much soul searching about his identity throughout. At the same time, he toughened and, with the support of his mother, formed valuable relationships that protected him through to the end of the war.
Thank you. And third?
After the war, Hans traveled to the United States, joined the U.S. Army, and later earned a journalism degree. He became an important media figure, rising eventually to become the managing editor of Ebony magazine. His 1999 autobiography, Destined to Witness, Growing Up a Black in Nazi Germany by Harper Perennial, written in English and translated into German and later produced as a two-part German television movie in 2006. Offers you unique insight into the everyday experiences of growing up Black in Weimar and Nazi Germany, courtesy of BlackCentralEurope.com.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that reading. And so hopefully that now gives you a little bit of insight into Hans and who he was and the amazing, oh my gosh, the amazing life he led. And if I didn't say it clearly enough or well enough at the beginning, I know thankfully, I think Julia posted the link for it, but this book is just phenomenal. I mean, Alana had recommended it and we studied it in our book group last year. And it was really earth-shattering for me. It really just gave the ideas to me, like, this has got to be done, and let's do these lessons based on Hans's life, because the book was so absorbing. So as you can see, again, I mean, I might have students notice wonder. We can, there's also resources in there for close reading. You know, I provide specific documents where teachers could use so students could unpack the reading. And if you thought, well, you know, we've done a lot of reading already so far, sadly, oh my gosh, sadly, there are no videos where Hans is speaking in English about his life that I know of or that I've seen in a way that sort of presents his story. There may be, but I've done searches and I just haven't seen it. There's a movie made about his life in German. There are other pieces. So the best that I could do, other than his son, who apparently goes around and talks a little bit about Hans's story, is this video biography. So this is about 15 minutes long. We obviously don't have time for it today, but let me just quickly play you a clip of it, because you as an educator might say, would I do this in addition to having my students read about this? If I were to use this video only, would this work? So this is a really nice job. You know, I thought it was really high quality, and so we included it in the resource here. So I'm just going to play you maybe the first minute, and then undoubtedly you'll be hooked and want to watch it yourselves. But here it is.
When you think of Nazi Germany, you most likely think about the human rights abuses and the concentration camps like Auschwitz. But have you ever wondered what happened to the black people who lived under the Third Reich? It turns out that even though there were racial laws demanding the extermination of the Jewish and the Roma people, there were so few Africans living in Germany that they were not really considered to be one of Hitler's main priorities. One very special mixed-race boy grew up in Germany during the Third Reich, and he lived to tell the tale. Not only did he manage to survive unscathed, but he also desperately wanted to join the Nazi Party. He was an actual prince, and he grew up to become a writer. This is the incredible story of Hans Massaquoi. Hans-Jürgen Massaquoi was born in Hamburg, Germany in 1926, but he didn't look like most of the blonde-haired.
Yeah, I know. So I'm sure you already want to watch more, but sorry, at least I gave a teaser there, and I can put that link into the chat. It's also, of course, as you saw on that document, it is there so you could access it through the lessons. But my hope and thinking is that this is a great additional resource to use either instead of the sort of reading there of the short bio that we have in the lesson, or you could do it in addition, because again, it sort of fleshes it out a little bit before then deciding to go into the concrete lessons. Okay, so going back really quickly now to the lesson. All right, so now let's think about it. We got a hook. We did the hook, photo. I want to learn more, hopefully. I want to see this. I want to figure this out. Then we learned a little bit about the persecution of the Black people in Germany. Then we learned a little bit about Hans's life. So that sort of is the hook and the background piece. So scrolling down on the lesson itself, you would see that here. That's the hook and context is part 1. And then as you come down, you see there are 4 lesson options. So like you saw in the questions that have been asked so far, like you saw in the quote where he was referring to Regelbrugge and everything, I hoped to encapsulate some of what I thought were some of the key themes in the book so that educators had tools. Some teachers might say, oh, I'm going to teach all these because they're great. Hopefully, thank you. But others might say, well, I don't have time for all of it, but I'm going to pick maybe the hook introduction plus one of them. So one of them here is identity, the need for belonging in a hateful world, which really gets on this idea, building off of identity charts. And then how is it possible a Black boy would be wearing a swastika? So it starts to get into the heart of that, right? And I think you saw, in the little bio piece of it, what he wanted to fit in like everybody. He's not born seeing color or difference until suddenly he was made to feel different. So that's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is the role of educators. Ding, 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 you saw here Dutka's quote, and there were others who were awful, awful, terrible role models and people who put him down and berated him and made him feel so small that he was ashamed of his race, ashamed of his color, and wished to God that he would just be like everybody else. So what role do educators have? The nice thing is he also had incredible teachers who stood up for him, gave him self-belief. And so it's a real great, hopefully great lesson that builds upon the great USHMM lessons called Oath and Opposition. There's a little bit of that blended in. Then there's another one. The third one is Race in America from the perspective of one who grew up Black in Nazi Germany. As you saw after the war, Hans settled in America and he comes into Jim Crow and post-Jim Crow. And he experiences racism of a whole different order in the United States. Actually, he found, and as indicated there, far less honest racism in America than at least the stated racism was in Nazi Germany. So there are many different facets there, informational and a couple of engaging activities there. And then finally, the one that we're going to focus on here in the remaining time we have here, which is this idea, how to fight hatred. It's an activity, discussion, and found poetry. So clicking over, you could just click on this lesson or scroll all the way down. It would look like this here, how to fight hatred, discussion, activity, found poetry. Okay. This would come in under sort of culminating work. So whether this is the only one you're doing or whatever, it would fit in really wonderfully, perhaps towards the end of lessons of the Holocaust in general, because it's engaging and it focuses on a quote that Hans gave towards the end about his hope for a better world. After everything he had seen in Nazi Germany growing up there and all the terrible things he experienced and saw, to then coming to America, living under a cloud of racism for his entire life as a professional and as a person. This is really, he uttered these incredible words towards the very end of Destined to Witness, his book, and I decided to create this sort of found poem activity off of it. So what is found poetry? Okay, found poetry, if you don't know it, there's a couple resources that I reference here. One is from Facing History and Ourselves, and one also, this idea of a class found poem comes from Densho. And the idea of a found poem, and this is wonderful, I'll tell you, for teachers who have boys in your classes, because so many times in my teaching career did I ever hear from boys, I hate poetry, they just thought that it was a girl thing to write poems. And I'm like, oh man, you have no idea. So I had to like unpack that. And I said, not that this is the way that I'd want students to write and learn poetry for all times, but it certainly is an accessible one, a safe one, and can empower them and make them and get confidence and wings, hopefully, to inspire them to say, I can do this. That wasn't that hard. And the idea is this: to take a look at an existing passage, to read something, whether it can be a few paragraphs, it can be a few pages, but ideally something compact and short and accessible. And then the idea is that you ask students to write down a combination or highlight or underline key words, phrases, and sentences, but ideally words and phrases that particularly stick out, that seem particularly powerful, strong, or impactful. And as they write these things down, okay, let's say you ask them to write down 10 of them or 15 of them. They write them down, and then the idea would be is that they would take those words and scramble them, placing them into an order that makes sense so that it is poetic-like. And that would be a great opportunity where repetition comes into play, right? So in other words, let's say you pick 10 different words and phrases, right? At that point, do they need to have those exact 10 or 10 or 15, whatever lines? No, they can, for example, they can say one line particularly sticks out to me. I want to repeat that one. I want to start with it. I want to put it in the middle, and I want to put it in the end. And so in that way, you're teaching this great poetic technique of repetition, of building rhythm and building sort of some momentum that feels and sounds like there's movement there. And it's just a real great teaching device. So no, you don't have to use all the words and phrases that you chose. You can repeat words or phrases. You can't add any other words besides those you copied from the text. And no, this is always the big relief to students, your poem does not have to rhyme. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share this document here with you into the chat. Let's see, I'll put it here. And then what I would like you to do, please, is to here's how we're going to do it. First go through, I am going to read the passage aloud, okay? And then so maybe during the first passage, don't write anything, don't note anything, whatever, just sort of sit back, take it in, let's look at what Hans says. Then the next thing, if you could please do, and you can do this either by writing things down on a piece of paper, I'll increase the font here, by increasing the words on a piece of paper, or by making a copy of this document. There, hopefully it's better. Making a copy of the document, and then either highlighting or copying and pasting them into the section below the text that is here, writing down 10 to 15 words or phrases from the text most powerful to you, okay? All right, so without further ado, I'll start reading it. It is only through constant and concerted vigilance that people can hope to prevent repeating the horrors of the Holocaust. I hope that my story will convey the inescapable lesson I have drawn from the slice of history I was destined to witness from uncomfortably close range. If it happened once, it could happen again. And if it could happen in Germany, a country raised on the wisdom of intellectual giants like Goethe and Schiller, and enriched by the timeless contributions of musical geniuses like Beethoven, Bach, and Brahms, it could happen anywhere. Terrorism and brutal pogroms, violent attacks in the name of racial, religious, or ethnic cleansing, and tribal dominance as practiced by the Nazis in Germany, have been reenacted by the Afrikaners in South Africa, the Serbs in Kosovo, the Tutsis in Rwanda, and the Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, to name just a few. Initially, the purveyors of racism need no more than the silent acquiescence of the public. In the case of Nazi Germany, first Germans and then the entire world turned a deaf ear to the flagrant human rights abuses until it was too late to prevent the architects of racial madness from carrying out their evil schemes. That sad chapter in history suggests that it is never too soon to confront bigotry and racism whenever, wherever, and in whatever form it raises its ugly head. It is incumbent upon all to confront even the slightest hint of racist thought or action with zero tolerance. Those of us who have experienced the depravity to which a country can sink under a government controlled by unscrupulous manipulators owe it to our fellow human beings to keep this unholy specter vivid in the public's mind. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do, please, is to, I'm going to go silent, is to reread it. And as you're rereading it this time, highlight, copy and paste into a copy of this document or jot down onto a piece of paper, maybe 10-ish or so phrases or words that particularly resonate with you. And then start to scramble them around in an order. Okay, put them into an order that you think might look good or sound good poetically. And then I'd love to call on a couple of volunteers to share what they wrote. I'll increase the size of the font one more time here. But again, this was shared in the chat, so hopefully you can pull it up and see it yourself. Okay, and hopefully maybe 2 more minutes. Hopefully someone might be able to have pulled something together. One idea for potential repetition is to find or think of your favorite, the most impactful line, and then place it into a couple different places to keep recurring with it. Okay, so perhaps as you're hopefully putting some final touches on on your found poem, I know this would be faster for sure than what I would do with students. I'd make sure I flesh this out, but hopefully you're getting an idea, and maybe someone has even come close to getting something done. So I want to show you something first before we, maybe see if somebody can share. I see some people typing some things in. That looks great. Okay, so I'll come to that in a second. I want to quickly show you fast one last time here how this could play out. Okay, over here. So on the lesson itself, there are two different options, okay? One of the options would be that students could do it either making their own found poem, and there is another option where you could do a class found poem. I was thinking about how cool that might be too, but I just think that that would be really difficult to navigate and to have done in the remote context. But a class found poem, I guess, yeah, the option is here, down here, here. Class found poem here, where each student would pick one line, and then everyone would share and give their one line, and then together figure out a way of rearranging it. But it just seems that would be really hard to do remotely, at least for me. So I thought, let's focus on the individual found poem in this context here. Okay, so so what I'd like to do right now is, first of all, let's see, did somebody type in a couple of answers? Does somebody have has somebody been able to sort of pull something together that you'd feel okay with to share what you've come up with as a purported found poem for this? And maybe we can have one or two volunteers. If so, maybe raise your hand, and then Suzanne, awesome. Thank you, Suzanne.
So here's mine. Confront, prevent public silence. The slightest hint of racism through constant and concerted vigilance. Zero tolerance. It could happen again. Confront, prevent.
I love it. That's so great. So Suzanne, Suzanne Saddlemeyer is also one of our educators for change teachers that maybe some of you definitely know. And Suzanne, actually, she was one of the first ones who told me, oh, Paul, I taught this lesson with my kids. And so Suzanne, do you have a pearl of wisdom or two that you'd be willing to share with the teachers here? How did it go? What did you take away?
Yes, I love what you said, because it really made poetry easy or inviting for students who maybe would be too afraid to try it. And I had some amazing students writing, and they could put it together in just a few words. And we talked about that repetition for effect, and it was extremely powerful. And it was so fun when they shared on Zoom. That's how I did it. I did it on Zoom, and it was a great lesson. And it was hard for them sometimes not to put in other words that they thought, oh, well, this would sound good with it. And I'd say, no, you can't. And that was kind of funny, because normally you're doing just the opposite. You're trying to have them, create their own. So I thought it was an amazing lesson. And it was perfect timing for me when Paul introduced this to us. So it worked out really well. But just letting them kind of express themselves, and just some of them have a hard time getting words down. I'd say, just pick out anything that pops out to you. And then the idea that you try to get 15, but then I think even in mine, I had, 7 or 8, because I wanted to repeat a few words. So that was, and then to be able to share that with them, and they said, oh, and then I'd say, oh, yours is much better than mine. Great job. We had a lot of fun, really a lot of fun doing this. So thank you.
Oh gosh, thank you. And I see some others have entered their poems into the chat. Holy cow, look at this. Chrissy wrote, to confront even the slightest hint of racist thought only through constant and concerted vigilance, it could happen again from uncomfortably close range, silent acquiescence of the public. It could happen again under a government controlled by unscrupulous manipulators, the architects of racial madness. It could happen again. The entire world turned a deaf ear. It could happen again. See, that's just freaking awesome. What the heck? See, I love that. And those aren't any of your words. They were choices that one makes, and students can just get so pumped up because they can do this, right? So you're doing a great job. So you know what? How I'd love to end this, if you don't mind, is this. So if you don't mind, please, what I'd love for you to do is for each of you to pick your favorite keyword or phrase. And then if you could, Julia, if you could unmute people. And obviously I know that people show up on different places on screens. So what I'll do is I'm simply going to call, like the first person to my right that's an attendee here is Mary. So once I say, let's go, is if you want to do this, if you can do this, I'd love for you to participate in this. Then keep your camera on so I know to call on you. If it's off, I'll assume that no, I don't want to or whatever. But if you're on, I'm going to call on you in kind of rapid fire succession. And all you're going to do is pick your one phrase or word that most resonates with you. And we'll go down the line in order. Is that okay? Awesome. So please, camera on if you're willing to participate in this part, and then I'll start calling your names. Okay, so Julie, everyone's unmiked? All right, thanks. Awesome. Okay, so I'll start then. Mary.
It is incumbent.
Marcy.
Deaf ear to depravity.
Suzanne.
Zero tolerance.
Michael.
Silent witness.
Teresa.
Happen again.
Susan Red.
If it could happen in Germany.
Agatha.
The unescapable
Mary.
Unholy specter.
Janelle.
Mary, you took unholy specter.
Brenda.
Constant and concerted vigilance.
Awesome. Well, those are the ones that are unmiked there. So I didn't call on people that had their sound off. Is there anyone else that wanted to add theirs? Go ahead, Marie.
Intellectual giants like Goethe and Schiller.
Awesome. And I see some people putting it into chat. If it happened once, it could happen again. So what I just did there was something, again, if you were in my USHMM teacher fellowship, it was such a powerful lesson where they had us read something similarly, and then they called around the room, all the kids, and they were asked to first say one word that most stuck out. And I'm telling you, where you don't have to call in the name, but maybe the teacher just points going down the line, all of a sudden, the students, they think, oh, what a lame activity this is. And all of a sudden they start doing it and hearing what each other say. And they're like, that was really great. That was really cool. Can we do that again? And so the next go round, then you go from the one word to the phrase. And it's great. Just like what happened here when somebody says, oh, I had the same one you did. That's okay, that's great. And you can think about it if you were creating a full class poem, a class found poem, how interesting that would be, because guess what? Repetition might have been decided for you. You already would have had certain phrases that was really already in there. So thank you. I see some cool comments in there. That's how I felt, I mean, right, as teachers, we're all great thieves, right? We learn things and pick up things. And like similarly, I tried to take some things that I had learned and picked up along the way and infuse them in these lessons in a hopeful way that could be accessible for you to teach what I think is just an obviously ignored part of learning about the Holocaust and making sure that we understand the wide swath of Nazi racial hate, prejudice, persecution, etc. And in that way, we get more connection and more, for some students, saying something to them about their own lives as they're trying to wrestle with their identity. So obviously I didn't have time to go into all the lessons today. I just tried to highlight a couple of them. Hopefully, though, it's a nice impetus for you, and feel free for sure. If you have any questions or wonders or like, how can I adapt this for this group of kids or whatever, don't ever hesitate to contact me. It's always my privilege to try to help. So I believe that we put into the chat, Alana put into the chat already, the link again for the evaluation and the clock hours. I think that's it, unless somebody has a burning question to end. I can try to put those links in. If somebody wants to unmic, if somebody has something to add or ask, feel free. Other than that, I think we can, I'll put my email in. Oh, thanks, Alana. Somebody just asked for my email. And again, I definitely miss this facet of teaching because, it's all about how it goes with kids. And so I try to create things and make things and convey things to teachers that will be accessible. So if you have ideas on like, hey, Paul, I think this could be even better, please don't ever hesitate to reach out because it's always a work in progress. So thank you so much for being here. This has been such a great opportunity for all of us. I know I've learned a lot today as well from the sessions, and don't hesitate to follow up with anything else you're interested in. We're here for you, and that's not just lip service. So thanks. Take care. Have a wonderful summer. Bye-bye.